My friend Ruben from the Ruby Tuesday told me that I should make sure I don't watch the Voyeurs with my adult children because it could get kinda awkward. Yeah, he was right. This Amazon Prime movie takes a very steamy turn on the whole looking in on your neighbor genre, but is it really worth the time investment? A couple moves into their dream apartment where they notice that their windows look directly into the opposite apartment. This then sets in motion a chain of events that will lead to disaster. This patient and dark thriller stars Sydney Sweeney, Justice Smith, Ben Hardy, and Natasha Luberdizzo. And they're two millennial couples that live in apartments that face each other. For some strange reason, neither apartment has curtains, so everything is just on full display for the world to peer in on. On their first night in the apartment, Pippa and Thomas discover that they can see everything, and I really mean everything, inside the apartment occupied by Seb and Julia. What they see piques their interest, and despite their better judgment, they peer in and get to see way more than they bargained for. Now this quickly becomes an obsession for Pippa, which then appears to consume much of her free time, which has negative consequences on her relationship with Thomas. As she continues to peep, she sees something that shocks and then saddens her, which then causes the story to really dive into its conflict. I think it'd be easy to picture a story similar to Rear Window simply based on the premise. And while this may share some story elements where we have people peering into the lives of others, across the way, this film does make the story its own, and it certainly puts its own twist on things. Now, Seb is a photographer who apparently is just allergic to his shirts. Every time he begins to photograph a subject, his shirt comes off. I know I'm being flippant about it, but it did make me chuckle at the frequency. It's almost like you could do a drinking game with it. There is so much foreshadowing that is present in the story. And while not everything is laid out for us, there are portions that do give clues as to what we can expect. The drama builds consistently and does get uncomfortable in several situations, but it was never enough to make me squirm out of discomfort. It's like the story would begin to push us towards an unnerving situation and then just shy away from fully diving into its unpleasantness. I think that while the tension that is felt between our characters fits and it makes sense for its placement, the way that it's brought about feels a little rushed. And I think that's because there's a portion that's relegated to a sort of montage. These montages do the job of showing us actions that will bring about conflict, but we don't really feel the conflict growing between the characters. Had these montages been broken up with some additional conversations, then I think the friction would have felt more real. The characters themselves are pretty shallow. There's very little development on them, but even if there were, they're just kind of vapid characters that we're supposed to become endeared with just because they're beautiful and brooding. I wanted more depth from each of the players in order to craft characters that would end up haunting me long after the movie ends. But once the credits roll, they're forgotten. There's a bunch of good symmetry used in the cinematography, and typically it's used to focus us in on a character's mindset. It's not something that's carried throughout the movie though, so the inconsistency was a little odd, but there is also symmetry to the storytelling itself, which I do think was utilized well. Now some of the dialogue is strange. Not out of place strange, just done in a way that keeps us off kilter. But some of it then feels forced, like it's not how normal discussions go. And there's a very weird and awkward conversation that happens toward the latter part of the film, and I think in almost any normal situation, it would have been ended abruptly because it was just so intrusive. The story is about obsession and desire, with a healthy dose of crossed boundaries, and I think it covers those fairly well. I do think though that the presentation is obvious for a lot of the progression, but there are a couple of very unexpected moments in this, and so I enjoyed those. So as I'm watching, this is a pretty jacked up story, especially as we watch the unraveling of relationships through a fairly depressing story arc. Now this is billed as a dramatic thriller, and there is a portion that is certainly thrilling, but this does sit pretty heavily in the drama genre with a lot of melancholy and eventually some darkness. And there's a cautionary tale at play here as well, but unfortunately the story then walks right into the obvious explanation of that cautionary tale. It's then followed up by overt exposition, and the story takes what was disturbing and dark and ruins the entire vibe by diving headlong into the ordinary. And while I don't disagree with the outcome, I really liked where I thought the film had ended, because I thought it was a stronger fit with what had been set up through everything that came previously. The ending changes the whole tone, and while I can see it satisfying a lot of people, I really did prefer the darker way that it could have ended. I enjoyed that the story was able to surprise me in a few ways. I thought that what I was watching was predictable and rote, but then boom, something unforeseen comes and it just messes with the story, and I appreciate the willingness to upend some of those expectations. But not the end though. I think the story, taken as a whole, is fairly compelling and entertaining, even if it is pretty unrealistic. But when it's broken down into segments and parts, there are a lot of issues that can be dissected. I think if you're looking for a twisted drama and you don't mind a lot of steamy situations, this could be a satisfying watch. The gloom at the center of the cautionary tale was decent until the true ending of the film, where then it decides to play it safe and give us a fully wrapped up ending. To me, the ending we get is not the ending we need. The best conclusion comes towards the end before a reporter is interviewing the subject, which is not the ending of this movie. Now, I watched the movie last night, and the more I've sat with it before recording this review, the more I've come to really hate the actual ending for this movie. I mean, never mind the fact that they chose the weaker way to end, but there are so many plot conveniences built in to make the ending work that it's just really ridiculous and moronic. So I'm kind of torn as the movie wraps up. I was engaged as the story played out, and I really enjoyed some of the twists, even though the characters are somewhat underdeveloped and they're shallow. I think the melancholy is captured fairly well, but it's also played safe by providing a cheap Hollywood-ish type ending. So at the end of it, I was semi-entertained for the 2 hours, but it's fairly forgettable once the conclusion hits. And also, any momentum and tension is destroyed by the overly explained and immensely convenient ending. There's a ton of sex and nudity with a lot of profanity and some violence. I give The Voyeurs 2 out of 5 couches. Has this been on your list to check out this weekend? I'd love to hear your thoughts on the story if you decide to check it out. Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.